The rain fell in thin, steady lines against the cracked pavement, the kind of rain that soaks into your clothes no matter how fast you run. John, a mechanic who had been working since dawn, leaned against the doorway of his small auto shop, wiping his hands on a rag that was already black with oil. The day had been long, full of stubborn engines and customers who seemed to think every repair should be done in 5 minutes. He was ready to close up, go home, and forget about work until the morning. That was when he saw her. She stood at the edge of the gravel driveway, her tiny figure wrapped in a faded pink raincoat several sizes too big. The hood drooped over her head, hiding most of her face except for her pale eyes that kept flicking from him to the street. In one arm, she clutched a threadbare teddy bear, in the other, a brown paper bag that sagged under the weight of whatever was inside. She looked like she'd been standing there for a while, rain dripping from her hair onto her cheeks. John straightened, confused. Kids didn't just wander alone in this neighborhood, especially not in weather like this. "Hey," he called, careful not to sound threatening. "You lost." She didn't answer right away. Her small boots made a wet, sticky sound as she took a few steps toward him. Her voice, when she spoke, was small but steady, like she had rehearsed the words. "If you carry me up the stairs, I'll tell you a secret." He blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. "What stairs?" She turned her head and pointed across the street to the old brick building with peeling red paint and a rusted fire escape clinging to the side. John knew that building. It was a low-rent apartment block where more windows were covered with cardboard than glass. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect a little girl to live, much less invite a stranger into. His first instinct was to tell her to find her parents, but something in her voice made him pause. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, like the secret she had was something important, something urgent. He glanced toward the empty street. There was no one else around. "What's in the bag?" he asked. She hugged it tighter to her chest. "It's for later." Then, without waiting for him to agree, she held her arms out to him like she already knew he would say yes. John sighed, muttered something under his breath, and stepped forward. "All right, kid, let's see these stairs." When he lifted her, he was startled by how light she was, as if she hadn't eaten a full meal in days. Her tiny arms looped loosely around his neck, and the teddy bear dangled from her fingers. The raincoat smelled faintly of damp cardboard. She rested her head against his shoulder as they crossed the street, her breathing already heavier than a child's should be after such a short walk. Inside, the stairwell was dim and smelled faintly of mildew and dust. The plaster walls were cracked, and the light bulbs overhead flickered weakly. He started up the stairs, his boots echoing against the chipped concrete. By the 3rd floor, he could feel her heartbeat pounding through the thin fabric of her coat. She looked up at him with tired eyes. "Almost there," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the sound of the rain outside. "Then I'll tell you." They reached the 6th floor, and John set her gently on the landing. She opened her paper bag, pulled out an envelope, and held it out to him with trembling fingers. "This is for you," she said. He frowned, taking it. Inside was a photograph, old, worn at the edges. It showed a younger version of himself, no older than 20, standing with his arm around a woman he hadn't seen in years. His chest tightened as he recognized her face. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. The little girl looked at her shoes. "She told me to find you," she said. "You're my dad." The world seemed to tilt under his feet. John stared at the photo again, searching for something, anything, that would prove this was some strange mistake. But the woman's smile was the same one he remembered, the same one that used to light up his darkest days before life had pulled them apart. He looked back at the girl and saw it, her eyes. They were his eyes. His throat felt tight. "Where's your mom?" The girl's grip on the teddy bear tightened. "She's sick. Real sick. She couldn't come down the stairs. That's why I needed you to carry me. We live at the end of the hall." Without another word, she took his hand and led him down the dim hallway. The doors they passed were old and dented, some with peeling numbers barely hanging on. She stopped in front of a door with faded paint and a broken lock. She pushed it open and walked inside. The room smelled faintly of medicine and damp air. A thin woman lay on a mattress in the corner, her face pale and drawn. Even before she opened her eyes, John knew it was her. "John," she whispered, her voice raw but warm. You came. He knelt beside her, his mind spinning. What's going on? Why didn't you ever tell me? Her lips curved in a faint, tired smile. I wanted to, but life got messy. I thought you'd moved on. Then I got sick, and I didn't want her to grow up without knowing you. She's strong, John, stronger than I am now. The girl sat quietly beside her mother, holding her hand. John felt a rush of guilt, sadness, and something else, something that felt a lot like hope. He reached for the woman's hand, feeling how fragile it was in his. Over the next hour, she told him everything, the years he'd missed, the struggles she'd faced raising their daughter alone, the illness that had taken hold in recent months. The little girl never let go of her mother's hand, but every so often she glanced at John, as if trying to figure out who he was beyond the man who had carried her up the stairs. When the woman's breathing grew shallow, John realized she was fading. He stayed by her side, his other arm around the girl. She didn't cry, at least, not yet. She just held on tighter, her small fingers curling around his. By the time the rain stopped outside, the woman was gone. The little girl leaned into him, her face hidden against his chest. For the first time in years, John felt the weight of responsibility settle fully on his shoulders, not the kind that came from fixing broken engines, but the kind that came from realizing you were now all someone had in the world. He didn't know exactly what the future would look like, but as he carried her back down the stairs and into the fresh, wet air, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let her walk alone again. The streets were still glistening from the rain, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, and though her face was pale, there was a flicker of trust in her eyes now. John's shop stood just across the street, warm light spilling from its open door. For years, it had been the center of his world, a place where problems had simple solutions, where broken things could be made whole again with the right tools. Now, standing there with her in his arms, he realized that life wasn't so different. Some things took time, some things couldn't be fixed, but some, just some, could be rebuilt. And he was ready to start.